Hello, everyone. My name is Paul McGuire, and I'm putting together a workshop for you here, a short workshop for you here on historical thinking concepts, teaching historical thinking. Um, just to give you some background, last year I taught a course in historical thinking at the University of Ottawa at the Faculty of Education for second year teacher candidates. And before that, years and years before that, I taught high school history at a time where the wonderful resources that we have available now did not exist. And the purpose of the workshop today is to share kind of some of the stuff that I've been reading about teaching historical thinking and share a few resources with you, including the syllabus that I used for my course at the University of Ottawa. When we're talking about teaching historical thinking, this is a different way of teaching history, and it doesn't matter what grade you're teaching history at, elementary, secondary, whatever, you can use these concepts, these ideas to teach history. When I started teaching history, again, as I said, there weren't that much in the way of resources, but one thing that we basically did is we taught, when you get right down to it, national narratives. What is our national story, and how do we convey that information to students? The traditional way of teaching history was to kind of roll out dates and events, people, things, and kind of put that on our students. And somehow this was supposed to be interesting. The problem with that kind of teaching, not just in history, but in any subject, is that the student remains kind of a passive receptor to the information. They're not creating any kind of content. They're not really doing anything. And the teacher is the source of all information. The whole idea behind teaching historical thinking is to kind of reverse the way that we see history and that we teach it. History is not something that should be rolled out as one narrative written by one person. But history is something that is a selection of concepts that we can teach so people can think, learn, and grow, and hopefully eventually discern. So let's go through some of this stuff. Historical thinking as an idea is old. People have been writing about teaching history as a way to help people to think for probably over a century. In the last 20 years, there's been a lot more teaching and learning about historical thinking, and I'd like to give you some other resources that I use in the course that are really useful. Now, some of you will have probably used some of these resources in your classes. If you haven't, I'm just going to go through a few here and talk a little bit about them, but I'm also going to give the link to my syllabus so you can go in and take a look at these things. Teaching historical thinking, there's a lot of information about the main concepts in this great website, tc2.ca. If you click on historical thinking, this is something that I use on a regular basis just to give people a sense of what the different concepts were. And here we're talking about historical significance. So you click on that, you get a video, and they're short. This is they're all about 6-7 minutes long, and this is about historical significance.
This series introduces 6 concepts to help you think about history.
So each week there was another. We would go through another one of these short introductions. This one talking obviously about historical significance. Apart from getting a video that kind of explained what historical significance was, you also received lesson plans, either grade 6 to grade 8 or high school, grade 9 to grade 12, as PDF lesson plans that you could use in your classroom. But just to kind of do an overall, the 6 concepts that were used in this series basically come from a book that was written about 5 or 6 years ago called The Big Six. Here you see a copy of it right here. You probably have a copy of this at your school. If not, it's a really good idea to get a copy of it. It basically outlines more recent research on what those thinking concepts are. Now, different authors at different times have changed what those concepts are, and that will probably continue to change. It doesn't really matter so much as long as you have a sense that there are basic concepts or themes that you can use when you're teaching history. Here you see we have historical significance, evidence and interpretation, continuity and change, cause and consequence, historical perspective, and ethical judgment. You can take any one of these themes and you can apply it to anything that you want to teach in history. So if you wanted to do cause and consequence, one way you might be able to deal with that concept, that historical thinking concept, is by talking about the First World War. But I think what's important here when you're using this kind of an approach to teach history, you start with the theme, which is cause and consequence. You talk about it and what it really means and why is it significant and important. Then you start really doing some of the history, but you're using the history as a way of getting students to look deeply at a thinking concept, in this case, cause and consequence. I think the one thing that's also extremely important about this, and to my mind, when you're talking about historical thinking, you're linking it to teaching inquiry. And I think we're really comfortable using the idea of inquiry when it comes to science or when it comes to math, but we really need to be looking at inquiry when it comes to every subject that we work on. And the reason for that, as far as I'm concerned, is because when we're looking at student inquiry, we're actually putting the student much more in the driver's seat. And that's the kind of stuff that we want to see. We want to see the student actively engaged in the learning process so that they are active, they are engaged, and they're part of what is going on. So that's where I'm coming from. And I think that's one reason when I started teaching this course at the university, I was so excited about these concepts. This is not something that I saw when I started. Unfortunately, in many schools, historical thinking concepts are still not really taught or necessarily well understood. And I guess the purpose here today is to give you some tools that you can use so you can learn more about this kind of stuff and hopefully apply it in your classroom. So we started off with that, and this was a 10-week course, and each week there were more readings that we discussed, projects and stuff like that. But what I'm interested in showing you are some of the links that we use and some of the incredible resources that we were able to come up with. Here's another example. Think Like an Historian is another series, and this series has been produced by Historica Canada. And again, the interesting thing about this series is that it tries to put the student in the situation where they're actually the historian. So they've done Historica Canada is a great site for information, and they've done a lot of good material here. The interesting thing about this one, Think Like a Historian, is looking at personal record or primary evidence.
Focusing on just one soldier gives the war a human face and reveals its traumatic impact. One of the most helpful types of historical evidence for exploring the experiences of individual soldiers is the personnel record, or what is referred to as a service file.
Okay, so right there you can see how you can really draw students in if you are not focusing so much on the textbook, but you're looking at primary information that students can get their hands on, that they can investigate. So when you're looking at World War I, looking at attestation papers that speak to the actual individual people who were recruited and fought in the war. These are documents that are available. These are documents that you can actually examine. And this is what they're going through here. So again, if you remember back to the historical thinking concepts, one of them had to do with the use of evidence. And that's extremely important. And again, when you're doing this kind of work, you also get an opportunity to do things with evidence, like talking about what is good evidence, where do you get your evidence from, what is the source of evidence. You start getting to ask questions with the students where you begin to discern sources of information. How is this a credible source of information? Is there any bias attached, or what is the bias attached to this kind of information? So things like Historica Canada and this series, things like An Historian, The Personal Record, these are really valuable tools, and they fit right into this whole concept of historical thinking. Some good resources, books, apart from the big six. Go back to this one here. Let's see if I can find the book. I'll find it somewhere else. There's a great history text that you can use. Let's see. Anyhow, I'll see if I can find it as we scroll through here. I'm kind of doing this live, so whatever I come up with is what we're going to see. But there's another text that I do want to show you that's done by TC2. We'll see if we can find that. Other sites that are really, really interesting are things like the Historical Thinking Project. Now, this is a project that is no longer really active, but the site is up. You can still order materials from these folks. And again, as you can see right here, it focuses on the big six concepts of historical thinking. It breaks down the concepts. You can see them right here. You can click on each one of these concepts, and they'll give you more information. Here, we just happen to click on the whole idea of using primary source material as evidence for the work that you're doing. So that's the beginning to the work they have there. They also have a blog archive. The blog archive is really interesting because the blog posts are written by history teachers, and a lot of times they're giving some of the resources that they use, some of their lesson plans, things like that. So that's really useful. They have a great series here of posters, which you can still order from the Historical Thinking Project. Here are the six posters. Each one corresponds to another one of the concepts. If we're looking at, let's see, we were just doing evidence, so let's take a look at the evidence poster. So you can order them. They're not very expensive, but I think it'd be a great thing to put around the classroom. They're not huge, but they're perfect for posting in your classroom. So that's something that you might want to consider getting, because you actually can do that. I just happened to, here's the book I was looking for. I think it was actually there before. Teaching Historical Thinking. This is a book that came out about 2 or 3 years after the Big Six. It basically covers the same concepts, but it gives a lot of resource material as well. If you take a look at the authors here, some of these are some of the big names in Canadian history right now, and they do a lot of academic research and writing about historical thinking as well. This is a great source book, sometimes used in Faculty of Education's as a textbook for teaching historical thinking, and it is just full of great material and is very practical, hands-on, and a lot of activities for each of the concepts that you can use. So I would really suggest if there's 1 or 2 books that you can afford to buy, the Big Six for sure, and hopefully your school already has it. Teaching Historical Thinking is the other one. Really, really useful, an excellent source of information. And I'm glad I found that while we were going through all this stuff here. Other things, and this is, okay, going as in a bit of an aside, but again, I find with history, you really have to find all sorts of interesting material to keep your class engaged. And as I said earlier, you want to engage them, by them creating content, by them doing inquiry. Sometimes you just want to see them, you want them to see really, really interesting stuff. There's a great history teacher in the States. His name is, he goes by the name Hughes History. And he's got his own YouTube channel. And he probably has 300 or 400 or 500 different videos. A lot breaking down particular concepts that he's teaching. Now, he really, he's a real showman. He's a great artist. He has, I think, his own video studio. And he'll put up videos on a regular basis, a lot about different concepts in history, but some just giving advice to new teachers, like this one here. I use this one in my class, and it shows what you can do when you're trying to come up
However
with
you feel
new
about
things that you
spreadsheets.
can do in your class, or new things you can show your students.
Hey guys, welcome to Hughes History. We're doing 5 pieces of advice today for first-year teachers, or what I would like to call them, facilitators of learning experiences. So if I could tell myself something 15 years ago, this is what I would be whispering into my own ear.
Anyhow, he's a lot of fun, and if you go on his YouTube site, he actually has an index of all the videos he's done. It's quite phenomenal. So really worthwhile going there, taking a look at the material that he has put out over the years. Not so much historical thinking concepts, but just the showmanship that goes with teaching, especially in history. And history, sometimes I really feel that you kind of have to go the extra mile, because a lot of students, when they come in, they think history is just kind of a boring thing, and there's nothing useful that really comes out of history, and that's just not true. Again, going through here, I'm just scrolling at this point. What I tried to do in each of the lessons, we focused on one of the historical thinking concepts, and then any of the references that I could find, I put in there. So you'll see if you scroll through here, a lot of other resources that you can use that are useful and that you can use in your class. Sometimes I got not so much obscured references, but I put in this course other places where you can get really good online material, source material for your class. This is the crazy thing about teaching history in this day and age. It must be really challenging because there is so much good information out there. So what you need to do is discern as a professional and find out where you're going to get your good sources of information. Places like the University of Toronto, they have an open access site for all sorts of primary material, networks, all sorts of sources of information that you can use as a teacher. I think your main challenge in all of this will be limiting your searches, because otherwise you'll be up to 4 o'clock in the morning every morning trying to get your work done, and I'm sure you got other things to do. However, even when you're looking through this, there are some sites that are better than others, and some that are really, really interesting. One that is really, really good, and I think students would like it, is a virtual museum. There's a lot of really good material in there, a lot of primary source material there, so that's a really good one. CBC has a digital archive, which is amazing, and it's incredible the kind of material that you can pull out of their archives for your students. And the other thing, of course, is that if you have enough machines in your class and you can direct your students to do some of this, they can do this investigation themselves, and I can guarantee they're going to come up with things that you wouldn't be able to, or that you wouldn't have had a chance to find. But again, this is just one site organized and curated by the University of Toronto, and as I scroll through, there's a lot of great material here. This is a lot of fun, this one here, Great Unsolved Mysteries. And now this is a chance where you can do some kind of inquiry work with your students. This is a great tool for grades 6, 7, 8, and they have a whole bunch of mysteries. This one is the Franklin expedition, and there's a lot of material in here, but that's just one of them. They have other ones, some that you will know about, some that you will never heard of before, but all of these are vehicles that you can use to teach some of the thinking skills that you want to get across to your students in the case of the time when you have them. The Franklin expedition, if you click on it, just tons of material here for students to work on. So you can flip through there, and this would be something that would be incredibly engaging for your students. So as we go through, there's material. There's another virtual museum right there. There's lots and lots of material for you to take a look at. These are all great resources, and I hope you have an opportunity to take a look at through some of these, that you can that this inspires you a little bit to try something a little different when it comes to history. And I hope this is useful for you. Good luck. And again, to me, it's the best subject to teach in school because there's just so much you can do with it. And in this day and age, it's so important that we really do a good job of teaching history and doing history, so that the people that we're educating really learn to become discerning adults at some point. That's so important in this day and age. So thanks for this, and I hope your PD day continues to go well.